Chag Sameach, this is Rabbi Benson, and I wanted to provide you with a relatively short guide to the Passover Seder. I realize that many people will be on their own doing this for the first time, and so I thought while I can't be there and we aren't having a virtual Seder or anything like that, I don't think you want to see my family at home doing this. Nevertheless, I thought that a little guidance now might be useful to you before the holiday starts. So, we're going to go over the 15 steps of the Seder, and I'm going to say just a little bit about each step. The Passover Seder, while the origins of telling the story of the Seder go back to the Torah, the model that we use is based largely on the Greek or the Roman symposia, a meal at which there were many customs, many steps, many rituals that were followed before the ceremony. There was oftentimes intellectual discussion. And so you can see how there are parallels to what we do. It's an example of how we as Jews will learn from and borrow from the culture in which we find ourselves, but yet turn the aspects of that culture to our own purposes to help to advance the story and the values of Judaism. And certainly, Passover is a story that over the years parallels the many events of Jewish history, the destruction of the temple, the expulsion from Spain, pogroms, the Shoah, and now even for ourselves in America and around the world, the experience of the coronavirus and being isolated and at home during the time of our holiday of freedom. And so all of these things contribute to the way that we celebrate Passover. They can all be a part of how we expand upon and further tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So the first step of the Seder is that of Kadesh, of making a blessing over wine. There are, of course, 4 cups of wine in the Seder. I'm going to be using not wine for this evening, but a little whiskey, and I'm going to say the blessing for this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niheh bidvaro. Wonderful. And we begin with this blessing, which is a way to sanctify the day, much like we do on Shabbat. There's a wonderful story about the host who, with the beautiful white tablecloth laid out, knocked over his wine to start the night so that none of the guests should feel bad if they were to spill later. Making people at home, welcoming people to our Seder table. In that case, this year might be reaching out virtually to people for the holiday. These are important values of the holiday also. Next is the ritual of Urchatz. For this, we wash our hands without a blessing. I'll be washing my hands here without a blessing. And this is done because we are shortly going to dip food on the next step, karpas. That is a time when ritual purity would have come into play. And so washing one's hands before dipping food was a way in which our ancestors expressed the value, the importance of being in a proper ritual state for the holiday. After karpas, we do yachatz, the breaking of the matzah. I have some rice cakes for you. The middle matzah is taken and broken, and this piece is hidden for the afikomen to be eaten as dessert after the meal. Following that ritual, we move on now to Magid, the telling of the Passover story. I wanted to share with you the idea that someone gave to me about the 4 kinds of people who use Zoom: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not know how to mute. The wise person says, I'll handle the administration feature controls, the chat rooms, and the cloud recording transcript after the call. The wicked person says, since I have the pro account, I've scheduled the meeting for 6 hours, as it says in the Haggadah, whoever prolongs the telling of the story, harezem shubach, it is praiseworthy. The simple person says, hello, am I on? I can hear you, but I can't see you. Of course, in the Jerusalem Talmud, it reads, I can see you, but I can't hear you. And finally, the one that does not know how to hit mute says, how should I know where you put your keys? I'm on this Zoom call with all these idiots. I hope that can be a useful story to you. I always encourage people as we go through the 4 questions, the 4 sons, Dayenu during the Magid section, to insert questions of their own into this part, expanding on who might be a Pharaoh this year, who might be a Moses, what situations have you encountered in which you felt enslaved, How were you able to free yourself? What are ways in which God has performed a miracle for you? All these and many more questions can be a part of your Magid section, expanding the meaning and the significance of the Seder in a way that will be fit for you and your family. After that, we would wash our hands once more, this time with a blessing. There you go. Following that, we would say motzi, the blessing for any kind of bread, and then the blessing for matzah, and eat our matzah. After that, we eat maror, the bitter herb. Then we eat it in a sandwich as well. This is called korech. The sandwich was a custom of Hillel, in which we take charoset, the sweet paste that is made, as well as maror, or oftentimes we'll use chazeret, a second form of bitter herbs, and eat them together as a sandwich. The charoset is told to us to represent the bricks, the mortar that the Jews had to use in building the storehouses of Egypt. And how is it that something sweet can represent a form of slavery? Well, there are many times in our lives in which being enslaved to somebody else's ideas, to somebody else's will, to all the other things that a person can be enslaved to, can be easy for us, can even be sweet, soporific, putting us to sleep and making it so that we don't have to make our own decisions. Waking up, being free, having to be responsible for ourselves, this can be difficult. It could be bitter, perhaps, but it is worth it to be free as opposed to controlled by someone else. And certainly if that is a force for evil, a force for chaos in the world, most certainly we need to free ourselves from those so that we can be responsible for what God freed us to be, which is God's emissaries in the world today. After this, we would have our meal. And certainly this year, as the Seder is going to be quite different for so many of us, the Seder dinner does not have to be a complicated affair, something that you spend all day and weeks beforehand cooking. You could make it quite simple, and as long as you've told the story, as long as you've had the essential foods, those on the Seder plate, the matzah, etc., the wine or grape juice, then you have accomplished what needs to be done. So if it turns out that all you're doing is making some matzah pizza, while that might be different, it is certainly not inappropriate if that's going to be your dinner. Again, the story and the time together and the seeing ourselves and our lives reflected in the Exodus story, that is what is truly significant. After the meal, it is now time to go find the afikomen. I wonder what it is like in your family. Some people keep the afikomen near the leader, and the kids or others at the table have to steal the afikomen from that person. Other people make it so that the afikomen is hidden, and then whoever finds it either gets a reward, or whoever finds it gets to make demands of the leader and the other adults until their demands are met and the afikomen is returned. The afikomen is a Greek word, and it refers to the dessert or the dessert entertainment. Once again, we see here that this is an example of how our commandments in the Torah have been expressed in the ways in which Jews found most meaningful for them in their place and time, and we should take a cue from that to find similar ways to express the rules and the traditions of the Seder in ways that are meaningful to us today. From here, we go on to Barech. We make the blessings of Birkat Hamazon. Certainly the key one of these is Baruch Atah Hazan et Hakol, that God provides for the needs of all of his creations. Certainly this is something that we recognize at a time like this when our needs are just a little bit harder to meet. And certainly it is a time in which we can recognize that we very often are God's agents in providing for the needs of others. After this is the Hallel service, which we further give thanks to God, using prayers that are recognizable from the Hallel service in synagogue. And then finally, we conclude with Nirtzah, which can involve, of course, welcoming in Elijah, finishing up the wine, many of the songs that everyone loves, and finally the wish that next year we should be together in Jerusalem. My prayer is that next year we should be gathered together in person, celebrating in our homes, celebrating in our synagogue, the holiday of Passover, moved by what we've experienced this year, but nevertheless ready to take the difficulties, the suffering, the other hardships that we faced, and use those as lessons and forces for the good in the world ahead. I wanted to conclude with words from a beautiful prayer by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. It has a tune that goes to it, but I won't attempt to sing that now. But nevertheless, Rabbi Nachman teaches, Va'afilu be'astara, shebetocha astara, bevadai gam sham nimsa Hashem yitbarach. Gam me'achorai hadvarim hakashim ha'ovrim alecha ani omed. Even in the most concealed of concealed places, places where God might seem the most hidden from us, the one of a blessed name is also to be found there. God stands with us, even though we endure hardships and they befall us. God stands at our side. I hope this is the case for you and for all of your family during this Passover and always. And I wish you a Chag Sameach, Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a holiday of sweetness and of peace and of hope for a brighter future.